I have a question about methadone. I live in Minnesota. I have some clients on methadone. They have to go every day.
Right.
They have to see counselors all the time.
Yeah.
It's a big deal if they can get a lockbox to take it home for a weekend.
Oh, wow.
Are there any other states in the union that do things a little bit differently than that?
Yeah, there's a ton of variety, and there's a lot of different bodies that regulate methadone at state levels, local levels, clinic levels, federal levels, so that there is a lot of variety. Myself, I only go once every 28 days, and I've only gone once, I lived in Chicago before. There, I also went only once every 28 days. It took a while to work up to that, and I, for some reason, get mostly the drug I do nowadays is marijuana, and for some reason I've gotten lucky with clinics that don't seem to care about that one that much. But yeah, there are clinics that give greater take-homes, and I think they should be encouraged to give much more, be more lenient with take-homes. I mean, it's a pain in the neck to go every day, especially if you live at a distance from the clinic, and it's a huge barrier just to the benefits that they provide. So yeah, they do.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, sir. And who did I say next? Did you have your hand up on the phone?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so then you.
Thanks.
Thanks for your presentation. I work at a farm restaurant agency, the Stonewall Project in San Francisco, and we have a lot of guys in our program that are in the mainstream system as well as in our system. You know, they go to 12-step meetings, they go to psychiatrists, they give them diagnoses out of DSM, even we do sometimes, I guess. So I like to find ways to talk to people in mainstream ways that apply across the board about psychoeducation materials. So like, talking about the DSM, you know, what does remission mean? You had a slide about it. Remission means no symptoms. Relapse is only the case if the symptoms return. You know? So these are mainstream ways we can talk to people to clarify issues. You know? The stages of change is pretty mainstream now. It's increasingly mainstream, right? Well, did we ever talk about the termination stage? Anybody familiar with that stage?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. So, like, we should educate our guys about there's a stage called termination, and then there's people that consider themselves recovered, you know.
It's not gone underground, actually.
What's that?
The termination stage has gone underground.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we should talk about it, because it's a stage of change. And the final thing I was going to say is, in 12-step, I know this is the hardest sell, you know, but our guys go back and forth. Well, there's things in the big book that say things like, if you can drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to you. So 12-step says, hats off to you if you can drink like a gentleman. You know, so I think we can communicate in that way, psychoeducationally wise, and it can kind of get around the community.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of really good, sane people in 12-step programs. And you know, if you've ever worked in needle exchange, you probably work side by side with somebody who's in a 12-step program, who's also handing out the needles, right? And knows that, well, when we're doing the exchange, when we're doing harm reduction, we don't talk about 12-step. That's after work.
Yeah.
It's, you know, they separate, and they, well, of course, there's crazy fundamentalists in there too. Can't really talk to those people.
And DSM-5 remission is even better than DSM-4 remission.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, I'm glad we're more or less staying with Megan's question, which is so important. The thing I wanted to say, though, is that since when are we limited to a medical model on the one hand and a moral model on the other? Why can't we have, as we do, a multivariate model? And with respect to the discourse, as I, the way I call it, there's a way to respond to everyone without, refuting or contradicting anything a person might be saying to you in a language that's entirely non-pathologizing. And that's been my shtick for decades. And you just model it for them. So it's out there, and they can hear for themselves that there are ways to talk about this that are non-pathologizing. So I don't even use recovery, because as I said earlier, I've just never been comfortable with it. I like the idea of discovery better. But you don't need to use that term. There are other ways to talk about it.
Discovery.
Yeah, can you say that again? Because you talked about it in a circle, but a lot of people might not have heard what you said.
What was that?
About discovery.
Well, I only said just basically what I said is that because I was never really comfortable with the idea of recovery, because it feels like going back, which most of us don't really want to do. In many cases, it's why people turn to alcohol and drugs in the first place. So, recover, what you had before. Doesn't really, you know, so, and also recovery feels kind of static, as opposed to a dynamic. You know, we could also talk about well-being or getting highfalutin again, as I said at Ethan's thing, euthymia,
Right.
which ought to be a human right as far as I'm concerned, but in other words, we should provide what people need. Internationally, you can build rights, housing, and livelihood, and, you know, nutrition and everything else. And then maybe we wouldn't be seeing these problems in the first place. And that's a reminder, of course, of the Marlatt, you know, substance setting model, which, you know, makes much more sense to me in understanding how these things arise. So I had a question, and that is for both of you, because I haven't bought the DSM-5 yet, because the last time I tried to, it was still so expensive. I haven't like memorized it like I did the earlier editions. Is the old modifier on agonist therapy still in there?
Yes.
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 What I used to call OAT, you know,
I
you're on
don't like
agonist
that.
therapy.
That's
It's still in there?
Yes.
It's still in there, and I don't like that.
What's that?
It's controlled.
Well, there's that control is a different one. That's another modifier. But for agonist therapies such as
I think they use the word substitution or like medically, they use something, but it essentially is,
it's still there.
yeah,
Because
they do have
it's a
that.
modifier that in a way, it's like, you know, you hit more home runs, but you got an asterisk because there were more games or something. It's this funny thing where you don't really, you know, it's their way of like,
It's still there.
still stigmatizing. Yeah, that's a drag. But yeah, the old one was on agonist
Right.
therapy.
Yeah, maintenance therapy, that's the new word.
Oh,
That's
that's
what
it.
I'm talking about,
It's
substitution.
usually
Oh,
called
maintenance.
maintenance therapy. Yeah. So, sure. Thank you, Ken.
We have
5 minutes left, so love to hear your talk. And
Yeah,
I can't say that I agree more with you guys. I can't say enough about it. Listening to my colleague, I used to work at the EPA, listening to my colleague inspired me to tell you guys, I too was a pretty serious drug user, dependent on several drugs at different times in my 20s and into my early 30s. And I went the AA route for 10 years and maintained abstinence and realized that I was a pretty miserable man and that the things that I like to do are not the most important things in my life, but they were important. So I started doing them again. And the good news is life couldn't be better. I have a great relationship, I have a great job. I'm fairly happy in my own, you know, in my own self. And so I just wanted to, Megan, you inspired me to put that out there too. Because I was a pretty fucked up kid, and you would think, you know, all those years of going to meetings, it just never clicked. There was no personal relationship to this word, this idea of recovery.
Yeah, that's true.
It was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and there was a one-size-fit-all sort of mentality. And I resented that, and I walked out resentful, and which they told me would cause me to drink and drug also. But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sorry to talk about you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still interested in how to sort of humanize and use the disease model. I mean, there's some advantages of it. You can get an insurance company to pay for your treatment.
That's the
And of course, that's good. And then we always have to, you know, make sure that treatment is voluntary. So if someone comes to me to a methadone clinic, they're implying that they want treatment, you know. I mean, it's like the diabetics don't think of themselves as diabetics, you know. If that's, I mean, that shouldn't be their sole identity. I'm a person who has a medical issue, and I can get insurance to pay for medicines and make me feel better. I mean, I think, you know, I still think it's compatible with harm reduction model, and certainly people shouldn't be penalized for still using other drugs.
But here's the thing, the government can put out money to put up traffic lights, to build freeways. Driving's not a disease. Well, maybe it is, but we don't consider it a disease. I mean, why can't we fund something that helps people have better lives without calling it a disease.
Yeah, I should comment on one too. I feel like the disease model was actually a step forward, because otherwise you're just a dirty drug addict. So finally you can go, and I remember years ago when the whole disease model was being brought up, I'm like, okay, I feel two ways about this. It's not a frickin' disease, because then it's these are the boundaries. The medical model, these are the boundaries, and these shall never be broken. And then, on the other hand, okay, good, at least we're moving forward to say that it's something other than a moral problem, or you're a bad person, or you're weak, or all those other things they say about drug use and drug users. So for me, it was a progression, but then, yeah, I do find it's limiting, I think that if you only look at it as a disease model, only looked at it as a disease model, then I think that's limiting. And I like what you had to say, by the way, about everybody's where they're at, so I'm glad we're having this discussion about recovery and disease and AA and all of that, because I think that harm reduction and recovery is need, to a certain extent, are such different things, but they always meet, right? People are, it's not stagnant. People go back to drug use, they go into it, they go out of it, these different drugs, they try different other things, you were saying you get lift off your methadone. Yeah, nobody wants to admit that, because it's like the disease model. Ooh, if you're getting high, there's something wrong. No, your medicine shouldn't be getting you high. Last conference here, I made the comment, I was speaking, and I made the comment that we talked to clients about managing their drug use. So if you came across some good heroin, maybe you want to skip your methadone dose. The next speaker came up and said to me that, would I say that to a diabetic, not to skip the dose? And the whole room went silent, and I was kind of like, what the hell does that mean? I mean, if you were there, but I was like, fuck, I didn't know what to say. It's like, well, hey, that's the problem with the disease model. You're stuck with using the diabetic example. So sorry, there were two. We're going to take like 3 or 4 more questions. You, and I think you had your hand up, right? So you, and then that goes to go ahead.
I wanted to commend both of you. This was really wonderful. Thank you so much. I just wanted to respond to the point about who defines the problem. And certainly around our place, and I think in general in harm reduction treatment settings, we're moving in the direction of participant-driven research, so that the participants or clients, or whatever we call them, both define their problems, establish their goals, and the outcomes, the data is really read in terms of people's progress toward their own goals. So it's all self-referential. It's not, there are no program-driven goals. So that really solves the problem of who defines the problem.
Yeah, I was just really interested in the term recovery itself and the kind of the significance it holds, and Ken made a really good case for making it a more inclusive term to mean any improvement from impairment or absence of impairment. And I've heard a couple of other people as well express that they're really uncomfortable with the term because it is very often, particularly in the US, used synonymously with 12-step abstinence. And I just wondered what other people's thoughts were, maybe you guys or anyone else, about whether should we be trying to reclaim that word, or I've also heard it expressed that we should maybe abandon that word because it is exclusive.
I don't like the word. I feel like it implies that drug use is something very simplistic, that's always the same, and then you should be recovering from. I don't mind it being used on an individual basis, but being used as a, even if we, I love what you say about making it inclusive. Obviously, that's great, and that's cool. I still am a little bit uncomfortable just with there's just an implication that if you're supposed to recover, well, that you're supposed to recover. That you shouldn't be like, I like using drugs, and it's been a lot of cool things in my life. Like, of course, your model is more inclusive because it does involve like what are your own goals, but the way it's normally used, I don't like it. Yeah.
That's all there is to that.
Yeah.
There is no.
For my personal self, there was a point, the first few years when I was drinking alcohol, I enjoyed it a lot, and I didn't have any problems. And then I started drinking it a lot more frequently and started having a lot of problems with it. And then I said, well, this isn't working anymore. And then I come way back, and now I get drunk once a week and don't do it otherwise. And it doesn't cause any problems, any impairments. I've always said I'm not a moderate drinker because I drink a fifth of whiskey on Saturday night. So, definitely, and that's another problem I had with the moderate drinking programs, because they were like, well, you should drink enough that you enjoy it. It's like, but I call myself recovered because I have recovered that state where I'm enjoying my alcohol instead of being in a state that was causing me problems. So I've recovered my previous state. That was good.
So there were two more questions. I wanted to stay though with history theory, and I was wondering if we might give a hand to these guys first. Stick around, keep talking.
So actually, I just kind of wanted to, first of all, thank you. I'm sorry I was late and I missed your talk. So I wanted to comment, though, on the fact that we've now, as a society, supposedly adopted this disease model.